Public speaking is the most common phobia, ahead of spiders, heights, and even death itself. It's been estimated that at least 3/4 of the population has a fear of public speaking. This stems from the fear of judgment or negative evaluation by others, which is what many of us with social anxiety disorder fear so much. Could then joining your local Toastmasters group be the solution to this? Hey there, I'm Neil and I struggle with social anxiety disorder for more than 2 decades. On this channel, every week, I'll be bringing you the best methods and strategies that I've used in my own life to feel more confident. Like me, you may have thought you'd found the solution to social anxiety when you found Toastmasters. In this video, I'll be sharing with you my experiences with the club and whether or not I think it's a good fit for people with social anxiety, and I'll also suggest some alternatives. First of all, what even is Toastmasters? So Toastmasters is a worldwide organisation that aims to help build people's confidence and to develop their public speaking skills. Groups will usually meet in real life, but nowadays some of them even meet online. Toastmasters members will have the opportunity to deliver prepared speeches and to even evaluate the speeches of other Toastmasters members and to give them constructive feedback. They can even participate in impromptu speeches as part of each session. All participation is voluntary, and if you don't want to have to do it, then that's fine. There's no pressure. All Toastmasters clubs will follow more or less the same format, and each session lasts for usually between about 90 minutes to a couple of hours. And the ones I've been to, there's an opportunity before the session starts. In the middle, they'll have a break, and even at the end where you can just mingle in general with the people there, which as someone with social anxiety, it's a really good opportunity to just practice talking to people in general. At the beginning of each session, the Toastmaster, the person that's leading the meeting, will come up with a question based on the theme that week, and they go around the audience and everybody, if they want to, can stand up and talk for 30 seconds on that topic. So it's a really good way to just get involved straight from the beginning. You just stand up in your seat. You don't have to go to the front, or at least you didn't at the group I went to. So it just kind of inserts everybody into the meeting, and it's just a really good way to kind of brush off some of those nerves at the beginning of each session. There are some smaller roles that you can do as part of a Toastmasters session to ease your way into things. So for instance, you can be a timer where you just time speeches that people give and evaluations, things like that. The group I went to had a traffic light set up at the back of the room, so you just turn it to like green, amber, red based on the timings, and then at the end of the session you get to go up to the front for a couple of minutes and just report back on how everybody did in terms of time. So it's just a really good way to get a bit of practice having some responsibility and then giving that feedback at the end, which can be really helpful. If you're going along for the first time and you're not yet a member, then you do usually get the opportunity at the end of the session to stand up in your seat again and just give feedback on how you felt the session went. Again, this is optional, and then you'd also have the mingling opportunities, and then you can, if you're brave enough, put your hand up to do one of the table topics, because that's open to everybody. Toastmasters will help to teach you how to become an effective communicator and leader, although for people specifically with social anxiety, the group itself doesn't offer any specific strategies for actually dealing with the nerves on stage, so it's not necessarily the best option for that. The size of each Toastmasters club will vary as well. Each group will typically have between about 10 and 20 people there each week. I think the one I went to was perhaps a little bit on the larger side because the group would average more than 20 people, and then when I actually gave my first icebreaker speech, I counted 31 people in the audience, so that can be quite daunting if you really are very nervous. When I gave my first few speeches, my heart was really pounding when I went up there, and even before, just the anticipatory anxiety was huge. So I feel like I perhaps did push myself a bit far, and the problem is that the group tends to only meet once a fortnight, so you do give a speech, you may feel great afterwards and go through all the anxiety and stuff before, and then you get the relief, but waiting 2 weeks, by the time it comes around again, unless you're doing lots of things in between, then I found that most, if not all of the anxiety just comes back. If you really want to get on top of speaking anxiety, then you really need to be delivering that speech 3 or 4 times a week if you can, or doing some form of public speaking, because otherwise you're just going to be torturing yourself every time when you do it, like once a fortnight, and there's just going to be so much anticipatory anxiety, and it's just all going to keep spiraling and coming back. So it's better, once you've done it and you feel a bit less anxious, to just kind of do it over and over again until it gets to the point where you really start to actually put the anxiety in its place. There is also a role there called the R counter, where someone will just have like a little bell that they'll ding when someone says so, something like that. Overall, I mean, most people didn't take that role too seriously. You might get them to do it like once or twice in an evening, they ding the bell, but I suppose if you're quite anxious and someone kind of points out that you've made like a mistake as such when you do that, then it may not be the best thing. And also the table topics, the impromptu speaking, the table topics master, the person responsible for dishing out the questions, would ask for people to volunteer, and they usually pick people who just put their hands up straight away. So if you're kind of on the fence, or if you're really anxious about it, then there's almost going to be no chance for you to get chosen, because all like the most confident people are just going to, whip their hands straight up, and they'll just be up at the front doing it, because there's normally only time for like 3 or 4 of those speeches in the session. So, it can be difficult to really get that practice in if you're not already quite a confident person. I found that each session I went to with Toastmasters tended to overrun quite a bit. They were supposed to only last for a couple of hours, but on average, I'd say they lasted at least 2 hours and 20 minutes. So they did overrun quite a bit, and it really just takes up pretty much the entire evening. So it is quite a big commitment, and also it's quite a rigid structure. It's more quite formal in that sense. Even though the people there are lovely, it's not got that kind of really laid back attitude that you may get with a much smaller group if you're just starting out trying to become more confident on your public speaking journey. I went to Toastmasters myself for at least a couple of years, and in that time I did every role on the meeting schedule, most of them multiple times. I even had a go at being the Toastmaster and actually leading the meeting. But the main thing I did find was just the size of the group for the club I went to. I just found it too anxiety inducing overall, really. And I think in hindsight, I probably would have been better off doing other things to try and build that confidence rather than just trying to force it. I'd say it really wasn't worth the agony just going through that each fortnight, spending like 12 hours preparing a speech and then having all that anticipatory anxiety. It kind of goes down slightly after you've done the speech, only for the cycle to just keep on repeating itself. I thought the anxiety would come down fairly quickly if I just did it a few times, because I'd heard stories from other members saying that they felt really nervous when they started going. But for me, I found that to not really be the case, and I think in hindsight it would be much better if I'd have started smaller and done cognitive therapy and things like that first, because at that time I was just trying to use brute force to really overcome things. Trying to expose yourself to these situations without having any sort of strategy will only really get you so far, in my experience. I think really it's better to learn some cognitive strategies that can help you beforehand, so when you go into these situations you're more prepared. There are lots of different cognitive strategies that can be really helpful and help you to deal with things like maladaptive thoughts, and also things like slowing down your behaviours that can really help with anxiety as well. And for me, I didn't have any of those at the time. There were people that said they went to Toastmasters and for them it had been life-changing, but I think in that sense these were mainly people that struggled just mainly with public speaking, whereas social anxiety disorders like a much more broader spectrum, and public speaking is just really a small part of that. From my experience, I think there are much better ways to start to get a handle on social anxiety than just simply joining quite a large Toastmasters group. I think getting a handle on a lot of the cognitive strategies to begin with can be really good, and I've even heard of people participating in group CBT programs, so you can actually get to practice with much smaller numbers of people that are all in a similar situation to you, and You can even go to things like social anxiety support groups as well to try and ease your way into things. A few years ago, I also stumbled across a public speaking group on meetup.com, which was just an informal thing, and there were only about 10 people that went there each week. This didn't have a structure like Toastmasters, but we just got up in front of each other and just gave speeches on random topics and did impromptu speaking, all kinds of things like that. And that was a much nicer, easier way to get into it, because that still caused me quite a lot of anxiety, but nowhere near the amount that I experienced by going to Toastmasters. So I think if you can find that sort of stuff in your area, then that can be a much better way to begin if your Toastmasters group seems too daunting. The meetup group was also held once a week as well, so you got twice as much reinforcement from that. But then also, because the group was smaller, you actually got to go up and speak a lot more as well. And then I think Toastmasters can be something that you can look to progress to once you've done that for quite a bit. Another really good way you can learn to bridge the gap so that you feel confident enough to go to an in real life public speaking group can be through online classes. So there's a lot more of these that have popped up in the last few years. You can even do things like go to online improv classes as well. And these are just such great opportunities where you can get lots and lots of practice in. You can even do them multiple times a week as well, and go to ones on the other side of the world, because location when you're online isn't so much of an issue. By trying to simply overcome your fear of public speaking, you won't necessarily overcome all your social anxiety fears as well. I think it's a bit of a common misconception, and one that I used to have, that just because somebody can get up on stage and entertain people means that they can't possibly be socially anxious. Public speaking can actually give you a sense of control that you don't actually have in a more spontaneous one-to-one conversation. And I've even heard of several comedians that have come out and said that they still really struggle with social anxiety. Comedian Rod Gilbert actually did a documentary recently that I found really interesting called Stand Up to Shyness, and in it he said he was fine when he was up on stage doing stand-up, but when it came to interacting with people outside of that sphere, he felt anxious because he felt as though he was no longer in control. There have been people at social anxiety support groups that I've been to in the past that have said they'd actually feel more comfortable if they were hosting a party than just simply attending it as a guest, because it gives them more of a sense of control. It gives them something to do, a task to do, so they don't feel as though they just have to be standing around talking to people where there is no script. This really actually surprised me though, because I feel like hosting a party would perhaps be one of my biggest fears, but it just goes to show that every case of social anxiety is different. So for public speaking, I think public speaking itself would help quite a lot with overcoming the fear of being the centre of attention, but it won't necessarily help all that much at, say, group conversations or one-to-one conversations, but there would be a slight bleed over effect, and it would help in all areas of your life, perhaps just indirectly. I'd say Toastmasters is definitely not essential if you're looking to overcome social anxiety, and it's not the be-all and end-all solution, but it can certainly form one of those pieces of the jigsaws that can help you along the way. My advice would be to start with smaller groups if you really want to try and get a grip on social anxiety. I think Toastmasters can be great so long as the group doesn't seem too intimidating, but also look around and see if there are other things going on as well. I think doing these smaller group activities can be really good to get started towards feeling more socially confident, and I also think it can be good to really do things as well that you actually want to be doing, and not just spend your time trying to force yourself to go to things like Toastmasters if you don't really want to. It doesn't have to be something you do if it's not something you actually enjoy that much. It's good to try it for a short while and see if it's something you click with, but just know that it's not the only way to become more socially confident. If you enjoyed this video and you want to watch more, then check out my next one where I'll be talking about my experience of going to more than 50 online improv classes and how that helped me with my social anxiety. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.